You're watching HCAM TV.
Hello, Hopkinton, and welcome to the Hopkinton Hangout Hour. I am tonight's host, Jim Cousins, and it is Wednesday, the 6th of January, which I believe constitutes the first week in January, which is exciting. Good riddance to 2020, and welcome to 2021. This episode tonight is our usual segment that we do on a kind of semi-regular basis, Ask the Superintendent. And joining me tonight is Dr. Carol Kavanaugh, who is our superintendent, who can take your questions if you have them on Facebook Live or on our YouTube comments, or feel free to call us at studio, 508-435-7887. There have been some new requirements passed down from DESE, which Carol will explain what that is, as well as checking in on all the preparations that are going on in our school system. January is going to be quite a month. So, Carol, welcome to the show.
Thank you, as always, my pleasure.
And before we kind of talk about what DESE is doing, if somebody doesn't know, could you explain what DESE is?
I surely can. So DESE is the acronym that we use for the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. They sort of make the rules about MCAS testing and time on learning and everything. And so, while some things are decided at the local level, we do take a lot of marching orders from the department.
You mentioned MCAS. In fact, MCAS was just in the news. I don't know if it was in this state or another state, but they were talking about how they're going to be holding MCAS tests this year, even though there had been some concern that COVID-19. So do you know, is that a thing in Massachusetts?
It is. So the MCAS test will be held this year, but it's going to be a sort of shortened version of itself. And, I think that school districts have been arguing with the Commissioner of Education that to administer MCAS testing takes an awfully long time, and it truly does. And I think he understands that. But at the same time, the commissioner will say, but we have no real benchmarking to know where kids are across Massachusetts in terms of their math and ELA growth. And that's really important information for us, especially as we go into next year's planning and, hopefully with the pandemic behind us. So I think that what Commissioner Jeffrey Riley has tried to do is arrive at some form of compromise. The test has been shortened. He says he's not going to use the results to do any district ranking. So, you won't be noted as a district in need of improvement. But what the real goal of the testing this year will be is to look at where children are and what we need to do in terms of intervention to catch them up to grade level, if that's what we need to do in particular districts, given the fact that, some time on learning has been lost this year.
Now, I just want to point out how polite you are to not have mentioned that, of course, MCAS is Massachusetts. I was just thinking of that.
Yeah.
Now, so the commissioner has said that it won't be used against school districts in, rating them. But what about kids? What is the test used for? Is it used to just grade how the schools are doing, or do the kids have any usefulness from this test?
So it's really interesting that you asked that question, Jim, because that test annually does produce an awful lot of data for a school district. So you can really drill down, and there's a DESE drop box. And so the information that goes into that drop box is really given to, the superintendent and the assistant superintendent and building principals and people at those levels to kind of let you know how each individual child is doing, but it will take all of the Massachusetts frameworks, the ones that have been tested in math and ELA, and it will let you know how your district is doing on particular ones. So say in the town of Hopkinton, we're really doing great on 5 of the math standards, but there are 2 that we could work on. That test will tell us that. And it will tell us that at a classroom level, at an individual student level, and at that 30,000 foot across a grade level or across the entire school or a district. But it also does growth percentiles. So what that will help us with is taking an individual student, for example, and saying how much growth did that student make compared to the peers in his cohort. That's very complicated and most people don't understand it. But imagine that you had been a student in Hopkinton taking the MCAS starting in 3rd grade. So you, along with maybe 500 other kids across the state of Massachusetts, could have all gotten the same score. And then when you went to 4th grade, that cohort got a little bit smaller because those 500 kids, and you all took that test, but now that might go down to 120 kids, all got the same 2 years worth of scores. And then we go to the next year. And what we do is we take all of the kids who are a part of that cohort and we rank order them. And then they create deciles. So they'll say, Jim Cousins performed in, that top decile. So his SGP score is 92. So you are like in the 92nd percentile. What we would like is for all of our kids to be above the 50th percentile in growth, because that means that our kids are learning at really high levels compared to their peers across the state. It doesn't really talk about how an individual student does. It talks about how an individual student does in contrast to his peers in a like peer group across the state. So you could be at Hopkinton High School and have no one in your peer group, but you could have 25 peers all around the state of Massachusetts, which is interesting.
It's really obvious. You eat information like this for breakfast.
I do.
Wow.
I love that stuff.
So, couple questions. First, how standardized are the criteria across Massachusetts in our schools?
That's also a wonderful question, because when the state decided that they were going to deliver to school districts standardized frameworks in ELA and math and social studies and the arts and all of those different subject areas, and then come out with a standardized test to see how students were doing in terms of having their kids access and learn those standards, we thought, great, finally there's going to be something that will take you all the way from the westernmost point in the state to the tip of Cape Cod, right? But what those standards really are, they're not curriculum, they're standards. And so a district, we always say we're unpacking the standards and what does that look like? And so then we take those standards, we turn them into our own curricula. And then our kids learn our curricula based on Hopkinton's interpretation of those standards. So realistically, we thought that if a kid lived in Burlington or in Spencer or in Barnstable, those kids could all move to Hopkinton and have had a similar experience. But what we have found is that that's not necessarily so.
Sorry, I just had to make an adjustment there.
No worries.
Okay, that should go away in a second. Okay, so when the results come back, am I gathering correctly that the MCAS is mostly for the state to look at the schools and not for sending to the students not like the SAT is trying to get into college, but it's a lot for evaluating how the schools are educating the student?
It is. It's a nice report card for schools. It does let us know how well we are educating our kids. And I think in some cases it might be like a nice other data point for families, so that you can kind of look to say, where does my child compare in language arts, in English language arts and math compared to kids across the state, kids in Hopkinton, to where he was or she was or they were last year. And so, we have that little bit too. So yeah, but I think that the state likes it because it allows them to take a look at where all of the districts are in terms of performance.
Okay, and how much data comes back?
Oh, I'm telling you that, so you can go in and print different reports. And as you are printing those reports, there are literally hundreds of them. You know, whether they are student reports, classroom reports, you can go in and look at how a teacher's classroom did in math for the last 10 years, and really take a look at, how is that teacher doing? So it tells you everything.
Amazing.
Hmm.
Does it come back with, I don't know, suggestions or plans, or does it just say, here's where you are, and if you need to get better, figure it out? How does any advice coming back with that?
It's pretty much the latter. The figure it out is there. So let's take, a narrative writing, for example, and let's pick any standard in that set of frameworks. So what it will do is it will say that all of the kids in the 4th grade at the Hopkins school were either X points above the state average or X points below the state average. And if you're below, your report comes with, handy red ink. But if you're above, it will come in traditional black ink. And that's pretty much the kind of information that you get. And you have to take it and interpret it and decide, where do you want to put your teachers, your resources, your money, that kind of thing. And what do you really want to focus on? What's most important in terms of student learning?
And I would guess that that's you, right?
So the assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction, Jen Parson, and I, and sometimes Dr. Zaleski will look at some of the special education scores. And then, this also happens at the building level. So for example, our building principals and assistant principals, Mrs. Moriarty, who is our ELA coordinator, K-6, she looks at those scores. So there are loads and loads of people at the high school level. You'll have the SMLs in ELA and math looking at those scores. So there are loads of eyes on those scores. And, they really are utilized for, targeting instruction. How is it that we can begin to teach students differently or different material, or work on our teachers' repertoires so that our scores are indicative of the fact that kids are learning at high levels. I would hate to say that those scores are things that we live and die by, because there are so many ways that we assess our kids, and we really do believe more in our local assessments. But the MCAS scores, they're just another data point. And I don't want families at home to think, we live and die by those scores, because we really don't. We're very proud of them, because typically our scores are exceptional.
Right. In fact, I've seen some of those scores, and I think that we should have you back on a show where we just look at that stuff, because the data is so thick and there's just so much of it that'd be really interesting to look back over a few years and have you talk about how you look at it and what you see. Did you ever see the movie The Matrix? Mm-hmm. And it's like Keanu Reeves can look at something and he sees all the code behind it. It'd be cool to have you interpreting that code for us.
I think Jennifer Parson and I would love to do that show.
All right, perfect.
Yeah.
We'll book it.
Okay.
So anyways, that was quite the detour, because I started talking about Desi, because Desi was doing something else recently after, I don't know if it came up before the new year or just after the new year. So our school system is currently having students back, I believe 60% of the time, is it 50? It's 50. And a lot of other schools were at 40 because of the way they were doing that. But there's something new coming down from Desi, right?
There is. So it's really an interesting thing, because I think in the summertime, on June 25th, we got our guidance from Desi, and we were told that sometime between June 25th and August 12th, we needed to come up with a very comprehensive plan. We organized a 36-member team for reentry. We put all of that together, and we really felt very confident about our plan. And it was a great plan, we thought, because it got kids physically, at least our hybrid kids were in school physically every other day. So that was 50% sort of face time with teachers. And I know that I've said it before, but it gets a little bit tricky, because if I'm a teacher in the classroom and I've got 8 kids in front of me today, then there are some kids who are learning remotely. And then the next day I might have 10 kids in front of me while 8 kids are learning remotely. And, that's just the way it has to be. And it's okay. But it was only okay until Desi decided that they were thinking about changing that up. So they had all of the superintendents across Massachusetts fill in a grid. And where Hopkinton came up short was the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education now wants there to be on the part of the Hopkinton Public Schools, 1 hour of contact time for students on their asynchronous days. Now, that kind of contact time could be that kids at the elementary school levels are attending morning meeting. They're going through the day's obligations with the teacher, that at some point there's an instructional read aloud that happens, during the day. Maybe there's, a STEAM lesson that could happen, an additional related art. But at some point during the day, kids need to have 1 additional hour of contact time on an asynchronous day that is in person with a teacher. So that would mean, in person, but virtually.
Okay.
Yeah.
1 hour, like every remote day, or 1 hour per week?
Every remote day. There can no longer be any asynchronous days in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts where kids are kind of just doing what they're doing without a teacher check-in, or at least an adult check-in.
Starting when?
It's supposed to start on Tuesday, the 19th, which is the day after the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday.
Okay. So how's that going?
Oh, that's very interesting. Because, one of the things that I say about the pandemic all the time is this is perhaps the biggest unfunded mandate ever to hit education, public education. And it's not a Hopkinton problem. It's not a Massachusetts problem. It's a national problem. And so even though districts could have received CARES Act money, when that money dried up on December 31st, that meant that if you were using it for salaries, you no longer had that money for salaries. So that's really important information, I think. So over the vacation that we just had in December, Mrs. Parson and I did meet with every one of the building principals individually to talk about a plan and to think about the sort of the personnel resources we have. Who's available to do this work? Where would we be able to make that happen? What kinds of time do we have in the day to be able to make that happen? And our building administrators are so amazing that we have been able to come up with this. But, in some cases, you're going to actually see building principals functioning as teachers. So there will be times when curriculum specialists or building principals will be doing read alouds with the elementary school kids. There'll be time when some of our middle school principals are interacting with students. But, in listening to parents and listening to their experiences, I think that it is really important that our kids have some point of contact with an adult in the Hopkinton Public Schools every day. One of the things that I think we've heard from, the middle school and the high school people is that, it's hard for kids to self-regulate when you are 12 and 13 and 14. So if your teacher has left you like a wonderful video to watch in Schoology, and you open it up and you watch it, there's a little assignment that goes along with it, and then there's some reading to do. Like all of that is there, and it's easy, I think, for our kids, for most kids to be able to access. And if they're struggling, they can always, email or reach out. And those pieces have been in place. But the self-regulation is tricky because some of our kids are getting up at, it's their sleep in day. So they get up at 10 o'clock and they're, more motivated to have breakfast than they are. And then they procrastinate and say, yeah, I'll get that done. But now if we have a check-in time at some point in the day, the kids have to be sort of up on Zoom, prepared and ready to get motivated to work. So we are hoping that this will get kids to get more of that asynchronous work done and done in a timely manner. And hopefully it gets them out of bed so it gets them to bed a little bit earlier at night and ready for the synchronous day that will follow.
Right. Just as a quick aside, I was listening when you were saying that the middle school principals may be a point of contact there. And I was just thinking like, boy, it'd be really great to be in on that when Mr. Keller is doing that, because that man has such an articulate passion for the work that he does and for the age group that he serves that I think he's going to be a great teacher.
So middle school is a very special breed. I really mean that. And I mean it in a lovely way. They are, in those funny stages of adolescence, and they're just kind of getting independent. And I think likewise, it takes special teachers and special administrators to really commit themselves to working with kids with those kind of adolescent needs. And I will tell you that Mr. Keller and, and his team, Mrs. Ben Bennick and Mr. Ocampo, are so devoted to that age group that they are special administrators.
Right. And when I started the first TV club, that was the reason I started it at the middle school, because I just felt like it's such an age of growth and stretching, and everybody's just like, trying new things and trying to figure out where they fit, that I wanted to, be able to bring some fun and positivity into it. And the kids are just so enthusiastic. It's great. So I love it.
Yeah. I mean, when you talk about that growth and stretching, if you think about it, if you took the sixth grade September pictures of a lot of kids, and then you took their eighth grade graduation pictures, the change, even just like physically in kids in those 3 years, is astounding. It really is.
Yeah. Definitely. So interesting. January 19th is really now. I don't know about all the other schools. I don't know what kind of change is going, but the high school is just about to end and begin a whole new course. Like, I don't know, a week or two after that.
So it's great that you mentioned that. One of the things that has happened, because the high school will begin another semester on February 1st, it would be very challenging, I think, to start something new on February 19th. So what the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education has done is they've offered an appeal process. And so Rob Curtin is the deputy commissioner under Jeff Riley, and he and I had a conversation over vacation to say, what would happen now if we were very willing across the board to say, we're going to implement this K-8, no problem, we've got that. But what would happen if we needed a waiver at the high school for this very reason? And he said to me, you are not the only district looking for this. So we have submitted a waiver to see if the high school can begin on February 1st. And we're just waiting for information from the commissioner. According to the deputy commissioner, he doesn't think it will be an issue because so many schools have said, can we please just do this at our semester break? It makes great logical sense.
Right. By the way, every time you say it's a great question, it just really makes my day. So thank you for that.
No, but they are good questions because I think they're on people's minds.
Okay, thanks. So you had meetings with all your principals. You have thoughts and plans in place. When will we be hearing about that?
We wanted to give the building principals time to meet with all of the teachers before they really shared with families what the changes are going to look like at the individual building levels. So some of the building principals did have faculty meetings on Monday, on the 4th of January. Others don't have their faculty meetings scheduled until the 11th of January. So families will be hearing about that, very shortly after the 11th, and they can, anticipate some changes. And I know that there will be families who say, oh, hold on, we have planned something for our children on asynchronous days. And we are certainly willing to work with families there who have done things, like sign their children up for particular math classes, or, families get together at that point in the day and sort of almost, routinely go for a hike or something. We're very willing to work and be flexible with families because we know it's a huge change for them too. Right. I mean, we really learned about this on December 5th, and 5 weeks later, here we go. It's implemented.
Yeah. Happy holiday break to you. Wow.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So that's interesting. Some of the building principals are meeting with their staffs on the 11th. So yeah. Shortly after that, information will start getting out maybe on the 12th. And just by happenstance, the 13th is another episode of the Hangout Hour. So I'm wondering, maybe you and I can talk and maybe get some thoughts, have some principals, maybe like either pop in on the show, or maybe I can videotape them really briefly and just kind of disseminate some information there as well.
Yes, that would be great. Yeah.
You're the best.
The more we get things out to families, the better.
Okay. All right. So that's really cool. That's really interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing what has come up from that. Now, I'm interested in, because you and Sean McAuliffe are just like really looking at this stuff. And I have said previously, near the end of November, that, I'm concerned. I'm worried about how January is going to be, because a lot of people traveled on the holidays. And a lot of people just felt like they've been cooped up too long and they're going to do it. And I'm worried about a surge coming, and we're hearing about, California's running out of oxygen, and Massachusetts is up to 83%, capacity. So how, from your perspective, where you sit, how are things going as COVID-19 related?
This is a busy week, and Sean and I are in communication every single day. The school nurses are out straight, and I do worry a little bit about them because they are in a place where their first role is to be clinical. So they've got kids who are coming down who need an infusion, or kids who are coming down who have lost a tooth, or kids who are coming down who are socially or emotionally dysregulated. And this is what our nurses do all day. But now we're dealing with COVID too. So they've got kind of a double job. I have the data in front of me here. And at this point in time, we have had 10 students in the Hopkinton Public Schools test positive since January 1st. And, it's January 6th today. I think what we're seeing mostly, though, travel is causing a lot of kids to need to quarantine, right? But I think the places where kids seem to be, transmitting or catching the virus are, in house parties. So, a group of girls have a sleepover, and then all of a sudden turns out one is COVID positive, and now we've got 5 other girls who are quarantined. Or athletics, hockey has been a place where, we're starting to see people test positive, and that's been a little bit concerning to us. And, I'm hearing from people all over the state that hockey has been, a little bit dicey. So, yeah, I think, house parties and athletics and those sort of things are the things that have been the worst for us. I am very worried about what's going to happen when, we are now reaching phase 2. So that will mean that Sean and Casey are going to need to start vaccinating people. So that will put an additional strain on us. What will happen if, the nurses aren't doing the contact tracing, but Sean and Casey are, and then they report back, and then the nurses do a lot of the maintenance with the families and determine when kids can come back to school and kind of walk. Well, they don't determine it, but they kind of walk families through the return. And I'm just worried about what the strain of that is going to look like if we're doing contact tracing, maintenance, vaccinating. I'm still, it's nice that we have been one of those few school districts that has not had to close for an extended period of time. And I'm hoping that we're able to maintain that as we come into these next few months. Right now, things are a little bit grim with the number of people who are testing positive, but so far, so good in keeping our doors open.
Right. Now, we talked on Monday about the Health Check app. It's called the Health Check app.
Health Track, yeah.
Health Track, thank you. With the attestation that people do. And have you, is it a lot of people that you've had to say you have to quarantine because you just were out and about over the holidays?
No, so that's not so much what we're seeing with that. And in fact, the nurses and I, so a timely question, we actually had our first training today, and it's clearly going to take more training. But I think what we learned today is that Health Track is kind of a communication tool more than anything else. So, for example, today we had a situation where, the nurse said to the town, a school nurse said to the town nurse, "Hey, I need to know the return dates for those kids." And she said, "Oh, it should be in Health Track." But when we went to look in Health Track, the positive test date was there. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we're using that date for a return date, because we typically look at when did the symptoms start and that sort of thing. So we realized that if we're putting reports in there that are going to be shared from the town to the schools and the schools to the town, we have to be really detailed about it. And I think another thing that we sort of saw was, so if you, Jim, became COVID positive and you had been out with 5 friends, if we weren't sure who those friends were, we would have to open up all of the different kids in health track to say, okay, is this one that now says that kid was with Jim Cousins, that kid was with, because then we know that that's a whole group of students. They should not be in school, and they'll all have that sort of same, maybe all that same return date, you know. So we're kind of working through the kinks. It's
Yeah.
like it will get better.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, so that it's really interesting because I know that the middle school, they are kind of in class by class, and the teachers come in and out.
Yeah.
So if there's someone in a class, you could, now would you segregate or have quarantine a section of the class or just one whole classroom? Which I don't know if that has actually even been done yet this year. Do you know?
Well, we have absolutely put whole classes from K to 5 on remote learning, which is very, very easy to do because say you have, 10 kids in the room, one teacher, and they are in person every other day, we can just say, oh, the orange cohort is going to meet remotely for the next 4 days, and then the whole group will come back again. But at the middle school, it's very tricky because if I'm a COVID positive student and I'm in my math class and these 4 kids around me sit next to me, we're not going to put that whole math class out. We're only going to put out the kids who are sitting right around because the math teacher who teaches that will be coming to school every day and teaching, the other 6 kids in the room. And so when you put the kids out because they have to quarantine as close contacts, it really feels unfair because they don't have access so much to their teachers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the same thing is true. It's even worse at the high school because we couldn't even say that we have a whole group of kids. And you could do that, I guess, feasibly at the middle school, take a whole orange cohort and have them go remote and then just have the teachers work with them remotely. But that isn't really how we've been working it so much there. But at the high school, it's terrible because, I could be in your math class and never see you again all day.
Right, right. So if a student had a positive test, are you able to track that student through every period of the day and see who was sitting next to him or her and kind of track them?
Well, see, that's why we've had those seating charts from teachers from the very beginning. And if a teacher changes the configuration of the classroom, they have to immediately take a seating chart and resubmit it to the building principal. Because sometimes we can learn at 5 o'clock that a student is COVID positive, and then we have to look at that student and see who he, she, or they sit next to all day long in different classrooms, especially at the high school.
Right.
We do a thing that we call north, south, east, west. So if I'm sitting, there's a person in front of me, behind me, to my left and to my right, unless we have that kid who sits in the back corner who only has a south and an east, and we say, yay, that's great,
Right, right. Is there any, now, we had kind of talked a few weeks ago about how Hopkinton was at the 50% mark, and if there were any steps between 50 and 100. And now this thing came down from DESE. So in addition to figuring out the minimum extra hour on the remote days, are you doing any other kind of future planning or thinking ahead for when things get a little bit better?
Yes, we are. We are putting together a full-time reopening planning team. And, I know that people in the community think, well, oh, that's great, just bring all the kids back. But what we have to remember is that, there may need to be some rescheduling. And that could be pretty significant. And when we do schedules, it's not just like the building principal says to the classroom teacher, okay, I know that Jim Cousins will leave for, additional reading instruction from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock on his orange days. So just make sure he does that every day, because on the green day, there's somebody else who might be leaving. So now we have to look to see if you and that other student are a good pair, and if you would both be going off to the reading specialist at the same time, or if not, how do we reschedule you? And then once we get your schedules together, we give them all to Linda Henderson in student information, and she has to change all of those schedules in our student information system, Power School. So that's an enormous amount of work. And I know people are like, well, how can that be so much work? But it really is an awful lot of work when you think there are 4,000 kids. And we took half of the desks in our school and we moved them into the gymnasiums, for example, so that kids can eat lunch there. Or if there were so many of them, we still had them in hallways. We would take them and put them out in storage containers. So now we've got to think about how will kids eat lunch and get all of those desks back into the buildings. And, we may need to put our, custodians, maintenance people on like 2 to 10 exclusively for a week and just have them do that, or pay them overtime or something to make that happen. But we also need to be really cautious about the trajectory of the virus. Like if somebody said to me today, are you going to bring everybody back and there'd only be 3 feet of social distancing? The answer would be absolutely no. Are you crazy? There's COVID everywhere right now. But if the numbers feel contained, and if all of the adults in our school community have been vaccinated, it would be a very different story. Sometimes I think, let's imagine it's April 1st and everybody, all the adults are vaccinated. How different might that be from September 1st, 2021? And if the answer isn't all that different, does it make sense then to start bringing people back full time? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Yeah, because I don't know how different it would be. I mean, there'll still be a coronavirus and we'll still have to wear masks and we'll still have to try to keep socially distant to protect people. But I don't know what changes between April and September, really.
Right. Joe Biden said 100 million vaccinations in the first 100 days is his goal.
I think so. Yeah.
So that's a lot. That's like a third of the country almost.
Yes. Yeah.
And I was interested, Massachusetts plans is January to February, our first responders and, people in the medical profession who are taking care of us, and those who are older. And then February to March, they're talking about people who have 2 comorbidities. And also the next thing right after that was K through 12. So has there been has anybody ever said, hey, by the way, just beware, as things happen, this is what we're going to be doing, or prepare. And how do you know how that'll happen? Will it come through the town? Will they bring a truck of vaccines over to your office? Have they told you anything?
So I'm going to say this, and it's all tentative. I know that the emergency management group had a meeting today. I was in another meeting at that time, so I sometimes rely on Tim Person, who will go to those meetings for us. But from what I understand, they are kind of cohorting communities because they'll bring in so many doses of the vaccination that, and last I heard, and this could be incorrect, so I just want to be fair, we were, I think, paired with like Westboro, Northboro, Southboro in terms of our cohort group, but that could have changed. When I talked to Sean this morning, he did say that he would have more information on the timeline, but we should be getting ready for the adults in our school to start being, immunized. So it's really exciting. I mean,
yeah,
this is what we have waited for a very, very long time.
It seems like forever, doesn't it?
It does.
I know.
Yes.
And you had mentioned earlier, Sean McCullough too, you guys are like hand in glove, working side by side, shoulder to shoulder. I haven't seen it yet, but I had heard that he had said some nice things about the school district.
Yes. So there was an article this morning in the Hopkinton Independent, and Sean, does say that we are one of the uniquely abled districts that has been able to keep our doors open. And I do attribute that to, I mean, you saw the letter that I sent to all of the people in the Hopkinton Public Schools today. Yeah. I really believe that every single person in our community is responsible for keeping our doors open. Every night we have custodians running around with, those, why can't I think of the name of it? The Pure Tab guns, and they are spraying and disinfecting our buildings. And every day, our nurses are back, and our cafeteria workers are out there, ensuring that every single one of those desks where one child eats is sanitized for the next child who's going to sit at that desk. We could not make this happen without all of those people in place. But I do think that the really like lovely and unified relationship that has existed between, Sean as public health director in our public schools. It's been really nice. I pick up the phone and I call him so many times a day, and every time he says, "This is Sean," he sounds so overwhelmed. I think, "Hi, Sean." But every day he's back at it, and that there are a lot of communities who have lost their public health officials through this, and we're lucky to have him.
Yeah. I was just doing a show with Tim Kilduff last week, and we were kind of talking about this, and no hyperbole, absolutely serious. There is something about the community in Hopkinton where whatever angle you look at it, where you see the DPW and the fire and department working, hand in hand, and you see Sean working with you so well, and you see, just like, not only does everybody get along and does everybody share the same vision, which is really just making whatever their purview is in the community the best they can. Not only is that really obvious, but it really works. I mean, kids are really nice in this town, and things like the community groups really keep this town beautiful, and the town departments go, above and beyond. It's really amazing. It's not quite like It's a Wonderful Life, right? It's not, but it's on that spectrum when I look at this community. And I don't know how that happened or how we got here, because, we did a show. We were talking about when the school district kind of went through some tough times before, things really grew. And I don't know. I don't know what it is, but there's definitely something here that's really awesome.
Yeah. And, I will say that all of those other town departments are so good to the schools. Like what people don't realize is behind the scenes at 4:00 in the morning on a snowy day, I'm like on the phone with Tim Person and Mike Manser. Like, what's going on out there? Is there a lot of snow? Can the buses get through with their down power lines? How are the sidewalks? Is someone going to fall down? I hate to say it, but the schools are everybody's pain in the neck, but they're also nice to us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, because we're all part of the happy community. We're all. It's really cool, and it's really funny how often our conversations kind of mention snow and ice. It must be such a huge thing in your mind, because I always tell my friends and family, you know what? If I ever thought I was going to be a superintendent, or I thought I could do that, I'd think about the snow days and I'd say, no, I can't do it. I can't. I'd be a nervous wreck. I mean, you said there's 4,000 students, there's so many thousands of people who are all impacted by this. It's a lot. It's a lot.
Oh, full disclosure, right?
Yeah.
Late last week, when they were saying, "Oh yeah, it could snow. You could have 2 to 4 inches. Maybe there'll be like a big chunk in the interior." And I just kept walking around my house thinking, "Oh my goodness, if it snows on the Monday, after this vacation, I don't know what I'll do." I'm sure that people would be so angry, because I'm sure that they've had enough of their children and they're all ready to go back to school. Yeah.
Right.
But
And there had been a conversation about that, we're doing fully remote learning. We're doing, green and orange cohorts. And there was some talk about, well, if there was a snow day, perhaps it wouldn't be a snow day because everybody could just learn from home. And I know that there are technical challenges. You have to make sure that everybody has equipment and everybody has internet access, and they have electricity and stuff like that. Through this experience, what do you think? Do you think that it'll ever be like that? Or do you think that distance learning is just really, really not what it might have turned out to be?
Well, that's interesting, because maybe 4 or 5 years ago, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education said, "Yeah, you're right. Maybe we could not extend the school year by adding on snow days. Maybe we could do these things that they were calling alternative learning days, but then they kind of colloquially became known as blizzard bags, right? So your kid would come home with this blizzard bag and all the work you needed was, essentially in this, whether it was virtual or physical, there's your blizzard bag. And then when Jeffrey Riley became the commissioner, he said if you were one of the districts that had been an early adopter and had been pre-approved for this, he was going to shut that down. And I agree with him on this, that there's certainly not equity on those days. And this was obviously pre-pandemic too, that no one was really good at virtual learning at that point in time. So if you were a kiddo who had a mom and a dad who could stay home with you all day on a snow day and open up the blizzard bag and say, okay, here's what your reading teacher would like you to do. Here's your math worksheet. Let's work on this together. That family certainly had a leg up on a kid who, whose mother was like, oh my goodness, I don't even know if I have childcare for my kid today. Yeah. So he put a stop to that, allegedly. And then of course, this year where so many districts were, fully remote or whatever, if you had the electricity, his attitude was just go for it for this year and we'll figure it out afterward. It will be interesting to see. I guess I've gone a long way to say it'll be interesting to see where he stands on it in the future, because I think people have gotten a whole lot better at virtual learning. And so maybe in the future he would say, sure, now that districts have been able to purchase all this technology with CARES Act money, and let's go for it. So, yeah.
Now, from your perch, just thinking, if you kind of have an overview thought on this, there are, to my mind, three possible outcomes with this virtual learning and remote learning kind of thing. Either it's really good, and things will be great, or it's okay, it's a bit more work, it's not quite as good, or it's just not as good, clearly. And I'm kind of interested if you see the potential for it, or if you think that it would be very difficult to make virtual learning kind of up to snuff for Hopkinton standards.
Oh, I don't think that virtual learning is ever going to be a substitute for the experience that kids have in a classroom with a highly qualified teacher. I just don't. Yes, there are some kids who can, get on the virtual learning and listen to, the teacher talk, or go into a breakout room and do the reading on the side, or work through some math problems, or watch a Khan Academy video. And certainly they'll learn and everything will be fine for some kids. But if you're standing in an elementary classroom and you're over the shoulder of, say, a 9-year-old, and he's got a number 2 pencil in his hand and he's working through a math problem, you can watch that child's thinking in real time. And then you can see where that child gets stuck. And now you've got a portrait of his thinking, and you can sit down elbow to elbow and say, let me show you this again. That it's really hard to replicate that in a Zoom session. And I can look around a classroom at those 19 kids and I can see who's zipping right along, and I can see the 2 who look to be struggling even from the front of the classroom. Mm-hmm. And when you have kids working in small groups and you ask them to talk about, reconstruction, did it work? Or you ask them to talk about a passage from Moby Dick or something, right? So I can take a wheelie chair and pull it up and sit next to those kids and listen to their learning and engage with them and ask them additional questions. But at the same time, I can hear what's going on in a group behind me. And you lose that too. You know what I mean? There's some magical kinds of moments where you're with kids, and I don't know. I don't think that there's any substitute for it.
Right. I agree. And you know what? I never thought, and I don't know why I didn't think of this. It's kind of strange. But not only do you lose that part, but on the other side of that equation, if kids are learning distance, they're at home. And not every kid has the maturity level, even at the older ages, to be home, to be at home. And the parents may have to be at work to provide for that home. So that's a pretty, Yeah, I mean, you know how many hours we talked and took people's questions when you were trying to come up with what the end of August and September were going to look like, because it's such an important piece of the family puzzle. So, you know what, I can't imagine anything that, even if remote learning was just as good, the burden it would place on the community would be huge.
Yes. You know what's interesting, I think, too, Jim, is when, I mean, you know, as a teacher that you have some kids who just adore you, right? So they will, some students, because they don't even have to love the subject, they can love their teacher, and they would crawl over rocks and broken glass to please the teacher, right? So that kid is in the classroom and the teacher says, all right, I need everybody to do these 2 problems. And the kid is looking at the problems thinking, oh, I really don't want to do these, but that kid will not let that teacher down. In the home setting, without that teacher being there, you know what I mean, as kind of a
Yeah.
motivator, that kid might look at those problems and think, I'll do them later, you know, and not do them.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Huh, that's really interesting. I think I mean, as much garbage as went with last year, it was some very interesting lessons that the educational sphere and growth had gone through this.
Yes. You know, if I can kind of get all philosophical on you, what I always say is that there's like this trinity really in teaching. There's the subject matter, there's the teacher, and there's the student. And relationships have to be formed all around that triangle. You know, the kid needs to care about the subject, care about the teacher needs to care about the subject, care about the kid, all of that. And I think sometimes in the virtual space, that is lost.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I it is. And I was just kind of thinking when you were talking about the Trinity that it's so cool to see students when they get something, when they grow, when they're learning something. And it's also amazing for me to see what teachers do. You know, I remember when I was a kid, people would say, oh, you know, you're a teacher because you're not a doer. And it's amazing. I always knew that teachers worked hard, but I never knew how hard teachers work. And I never knew how many hours after school they're there, or how often they're grading papers and they're like, you know, getting information out there. It's as I often say, there's only one thing we bring out of this life, and that's our relationships. And teachers are in the business of, you know, relationships and teaching not just subject matters, but also social skills and, you know, getting along and working together. It's a wonderful experience.
It is. And you know what I think? I think part of the reason why this pandemic has been so difficult for teachers is that they want to have exactly what you just described. You know, that same efficacy in their efforts, and they're killing themselves to do it. You know, they're in those Zoom meetings and they're emailing and they're, you know, constantly in communication with kids to get them to the promised land, and it's harder work. I mean, I don't want to be Debbie Downer and say, you know, virtual learning is just one big zero, it doesn't work. It's working, it just doesn't work as well as the old brick and mortar setting, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, right. Okay, so we just have a couple minutes left. Let's not talk anymore about COVID-19. And let's not talk about what Desi's doing. Let's talk about some other things that you're working on. There's got to be some other things that are coming across your desk, or, you know, you work very closely with the school committee coming up with whatever policies that they're working on or things like that. What other conversations and work are you doing now?
Well, next Monday evening, I mean, as you know, because you'll be filming it, the school committee does have its budget hearing. So we are just under 6% in going from the FY21 to the FY22 budget. And, we're really hoping that parents will come out and take a look at that budget and, kind of see what it is that the schools are asking for and what they need. And I don't know how many people know, but that budget season starts in late September and carries all the way to January. And to be honest with you, it will probably go all the way to town meeting. No kidding. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a big thing. That's like just goes on forever.
It is. And some of the other exciting work we have going on still, and maybe the folks who watched our show with Jennifer Suker would be following this, but several years ago we started to think about doing all that diversity and equity work in the Hopkinton Public Schools, and I think 3 years in now, we've got a consulting group that comes in to interrogate the curriculum. We've got someone who comes in to work with our kids in grades 5, 8, and 9, and this consultant is like dynamite. We had Visions come in to talk with teachers on the opening day. We've got the middle school and high school assistant principals, Mr. Ocampo and Mrs. Tice are, they've got this kind of real grassroots thing going on. So that's some really exciting work. And I'm very passionate about that. And now we've been able to hire Jennifer. So, she is not just our L coordinator or our ESOL coordinator, but she also brings the equity and access piece to the public schools. So that is also really exciting. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you have any goals for 2021 other than the budget, which, you know what, the budget is always the budget, and it's tough in today's world. Money just does not go as far as you'd like it to, and it takes a lot of time and attention to hammer that out. So putting that piece aside, do you have any goals that you're working on?
So when I work with the principals, I say our goal is just to survive, but but one of the goals that I kind of set out with in the beginning of the school year, and I think I was probably very optimistic then, was to really have a lot more communication with families about teaching and learning. For a while when I was writing my blog was always about things like vocabulary instruction or, time on technology. And that was really exciting stuff. And what has happened now, I think, is that, my communications with families have been kind of perfunctory. Like, I have to tell you that now we're going to be meeting on asynchronous days, or I have to tell you that, those kinds of things. But I do really wish that, and maybe I will make this my 2021 goal again, is to start communicating with families more about teaching and learning. I would love to. I'm very passionate about that. And I always let it take a back seat to the work that feels more managerial.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Well, I mean, I would cut yourself a little bit of slack. I don't know if I would say you let it take a back seat to work that seems more managerial. I just think that this, as they say, with no exaggeration, is an unprecedented time that we're living through. And you know what? You're making it up as you go along. You know what I mean? You're like, you and us and the system are going through this time with no manual and no handbook. And it's a big deal. It's a big deal. It's 4,000 kids. It's all these schools. It's all these facilities. So you know what? If we get through alive, that's a lot.
Yes. I mean, and I guess for me, there are just some little joys that happened. So recently, the Hopkinton PTO had said, what would it be like if we created these kind of online storying videos where each of the building principals or curriculum people or teachers just read a story aloud, and those were made available to families. And one of the happiest things I did was read that story aloud. I think that those are the kinds of things when you get into a classroom and you get to see kids teaching and learning. There is a young fifth grader, I think, who continues to email me and ask me wonderful questions about how school districts run. And I have had more fun emailing back and forth with that student. I mean, it all started with the question of, what does PhD mean? And after that, we have just taken off. So I continue to have correspondence, maybe once or twice a week with that kiddo. And that's lovely too.
That's fantastic.
Great.
And I saw those stories too. And I think it's great. I think there's something almost meditational about just taking the time to not be rushed and share some of these stories. Because, so many of these stories have such a deeper meaning to them, and they're just very profound in a very simple way.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, we're almost out of time.
Yeah.
In fact, let me just check. I gotta say, okay. So you have 30 seconds. You have a brand new episode of Highlights from the Hill. Let people know what you're talking about on it.
Oh, yes. So Jennifer Suker, who is our new director of English language learners, and she also is the director of equity and access. So she's got a 50-50 split. Tune into that Highlights for the Hill from the Hill episode, and you will be able to see what Jennifer's sort of split roles are. And
Hi. So today we're at College Rock Park, which is on College Street. If you go down the road, it's about a mile on the right side or maybe less. And this is the beginning of the trail. It's a nice little parking lot. About 11 people can park here or so, 8 people. The first thing you'll see is this really cool rock right here, which has some beautiful fern growth on the top and a couple of different kinds of moss, as well as some lichen. Just gorgeous. These birch trees have been growing right in the edge of the rock. So that's the first thing you'll see. A little history about this place. Hopkinton